education has changed tremendously over my career. The last 30 years, it's incredible the evolution that's taken place, and we need to share that with people and let them know the amazing things that are happening in schools.
I'm Dr. Jill Johnson. I've spent my entire career in education. I started in the classroom, then trained teachers, and most recently served as a high school administrator. Now I help highlight the stories, struggles, and successes in educating the next generation of content creators. Welcome to CGTV.
Dr. Jill, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about school PR, school communication, and I just think your background in this area is so deep, coming from, educator to moving into administration, to then really studying student-generated content. There's just a rich background around school communication that you've had. But I also really want to highlight your most recent experience. As we were on kind of different sides of the table, getting to work together, but you were working in a school district last year, and want to reflect a little bit on all of what we've learned this past year. So I think this episode is going to be great to get to discuss some of that, but also I want to highlight we're headed to NSPRA here shortly. So this is your first NSPRA. Are you excited?
I'm super excited. I'm excited to meet a lot of PR professionals, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the beignets and the Cajun food, my favorite type of cuisine. So very excited.
Well, I'm excited for you to get to be there. I was really disappointed that it didn't happen last year in St. Louis, but was there in DC a couple years ago. It was a fantastic time. We had so many great conversations. Also, it was warm in DC, but it might even be warmer in New Orleans this year. So I'm excited for that, and we'll be trying to do some live streams from New Orleans to help support the cause, but also, I want to digest a little bit. A lot's happened since we've had an NSPRA in person, and coming off of your experience inside of a school district, I want to understand a little bit of what happened last year. From a communication perspective, I feel like we learned a lot. We had so many rich conversations, with friends in the industry. But I want to understand a little bit from your perspective, what really changed last year from a communication perspective.
So when we think back to March 2020, we really had to pivot. We were cruising right along, regular school year. We heard these inklings, and all of a sudden. Late February, we were at a crisis training. We talked a little bit about pandemics, but never thought it would happen to us. But in March, we definitely had to pivot. So we went from in school one day to remote school 2 days later. And so how we were able to communicate that was really at the top of our priority list, communicating to our parents, stakeholders, and students. And so dealing with public relations is really, by default, goes to the administrative team, and they're charged with figuring out what's the best way to communicate that. And so we found ourselves crafting messages together, rewriting messages, making a plan for one day, and then having to change it the next, because as we put protocols into place, things changed in the outside world, and so it impacted what was happening in our buildings. We get feedback from our stakeholders, and then we'd have to again change our communication and figure out what that might be. So we were putting messages on our website, sending them out through class intercom to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anywhere where we could touch our stakeholders, and then also using other things like One Call and even Power School to communicate to our students and parents.
Yeah, so I want to understand a little bit. Crisis PR has always been a part of school communication, but it was something that was an infrequent activity, hopefully. But this past year, it became a daily occurrence to have the crisis PR team figure out where things were. But it also, I think, really leveled up where school PR sits within the school district. It all of a sudden brought the conversation of school PR and a lot of the individuals who were experts in that area into really the superintendent's office and really changed the role of school PR. Did you feel that, from your district?
Yeah, definitely, because usually, like you mentioned, crisis mode is usually maybe you have a car accident or God forbid you have the loss of a student. That's when our crisis team gathers and we figure out how do we communicate that out. And that's 1 day, 2 days, 3 days maybe, and you deal with that crisis and figure out how to move forward. And this was just crisis mode, crisis mode, crisis mode for really the last 12 to 18 months. You feel that heightened impact. You have a lot of people on edge. You have some students remote, some students in person. So the communication had to be accurate, it had to be timely, and it had to be consistent. And so that's where we just saw how clear that messaging had to be, and had to be on point and stay true to our mission every day. And then again, be ready to pivot at any time and go to contingency plan A, B, or C, depending on what was called for.
Yeah, well, I think it's been a phenomenal role that so many have stepped up to the table, but I also think that adrenaline pumping for 12 to 18 months, we've got a lot to get out at NSPRA. I think I'm excited to really spend some time with everybody and talk about kind of what's next for school PR. I'd love to understand from your perspective, what do you really feel like is next for school PR? And where do we go from here?
Well, I think for PR, you really need to think about your messaging and what's the story that you're wanting to tell about your school. And so I think we need to empower more people to help tell our story. If it's only coming from central office or only coming from 1 or 2 people, that's a very narrow scope of the true story that's happening at your school. And I also think everyone has a view of what education is, because we all went to school at some point in our lives, and education has changed tremendously over my career. The last 30 years, it's incredible the evolution that's taken place, and we need to share that with people and let them know the amazing things that are happening in schools. So I think that's the role that PR really needs to take, is sharing those stories, telling them from a wide variety of perspectives, from students, staff, sponsors, administrators, and everybody taking a part in that storytelling process.
Well, I love it, Dr. Jill, and we've got a lot more to that conversation, both with a report you've been working on for student-generated content. We've got the school's social media report coming out. We've even got some swag for school PR. So feel free to drop us an email. We'd love to send you out some swag and chat with you at NSPRA.
Yeah, can't wait.